This is Ignatius 500, and my name is Kieran Halloran. What is the point of studying? And how can the life of St. Ignatius of Loyola set an example for students? When we talk about vocations, about devoting one's life to Christ, it does seem strange to mention studying, sitting at a desk for hours, taking exams, when it seems that we should be focusing on traveling far and wide to proclaim the gospel. If we think about studying, we generally imagine the burdens of exams, of classes, of assignments, and so on. Some of you have probably had a negative experience with studies, perhaps in college or university or high school. But let's put that aside and focus on St. Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Loyola was a wise man, but he was never an academic. Both in Loyola and Arevalo, he received limited schooling. After his conversion and sojourn in Manresa, he managed to finish his pilgrimage to Jerusalem. However, this period in the Holy Land didn't last as long as he wanted, and he had to return to Barcelona in 1524, where he decided to start studying in a more organized way. Imagine what it meant to that 33-year-old former soldier to restart his studies with classmates so much younger than him. After brushing up on his Latin in Barcelona, he went on to the famous new universities of Alcalá de Henares and Salamanca. But in both cities, he felt lost in many activities and struggled to stay focused on his studies. He was divided. On the one hand, he felt called to speak about God, to give spiritual exercises, and to have spiritual conversations with others. And on the other hand, he saw that studies offered the only way to be well-trained and recognized by the Church to carry out his desire to proclaim the gospel. In 1528, Ignatius decides to go to Paris and make another change in his life, knowing that he has to study seriously, with the fewest possible distractions. He begins by changing his name from Inigo to Ignatius, the name he'll use to enroll in the university. The teaching methods at the university, one of the best in the world at the time, combined with the environment, made it easier for him to entirely dedicate himself to his education. In the constitutions that he wrote years later as Superior General of the Society of Jesus, Ignatius said that studies demand the whole man. In other words, it's a demanding mission. Ignatius's period as a student reminds us that while we study, we must always keep God on the horizon. We must always put aside other activities that, although good, distract us from the educational objective, the search for truth and service to others. However, his commitment to studies did not prevent him from making real friends, such as Francis Xavier and Peter Faber, with whom he would found the society years later. Studying can shape us and give us an intellectual formation that helps us develop professionalism and leadership skills. It matters how you study, because what you do in the present, even if you don't see it, will always have repercussions in the future. Is studying, therefore, the most important thing in the world? Of course not. In fact, there are plenty of people, such as craftsmen and factory workers, who gain wisdom and an understanding of life's complexity despite not having studied formally. The question then isn't so much about whether you should study or what to study, but why? Why study? If I do it simply for myself to earn money or find a job, I run the risk of seeing it as something detached from who I'm called to be. However, if I see it as a way of understanding reality that makes me wiser, it becomes a source of joy through which I can help others. The Book of Wisdom tells us, Indeed, were anyone perfect among the sons of men, if he lacked the wisdom that comes from God, he would still count for nothing. In other words, we can study hard, earn many degrees, and speak many languages. But if we don't have the wisdom of God, it's practically futile. In the founding document of the Society of Jesus, called the Formula of the Institute, St. Ignatius wrote that to be admitted to the newly established order, the candidates had to be men who are completely and humble and prudent in Christ, and excellent in purity of Christian life and in letters. What St. Ignatius said about the Jesuits is applicable to our way of studying as Christians. We are called to live out our formation and the acquisition of knowledge with humility. It is important to study with rigor and seriousness, but studying must always be accompanied by Christian virtues, especially to love God and to love others.